Okay, so it look like we're ready to go.
All right, so I'm going to mute all and we'll get started.
All right. Well, thank you all for being here. I'm Wendy Videlock, and I am coming to you from the western slope of Colorado, where it is a beautiful autumn day. I am delighted to be hosting you all today for this wonderful launch for 3 extraordinary poets. And before we begin, I just want to introduce our fearless leader, Alex Pepple, editor, founder, publisher of Muse Press, a fabulous poet, good friend, so supportive of poetry, so supportive of poets who work in the tradition of rhyme and meter. But Alex is also a mighty fine poet in his own right. His poetry and prose has been appearing in Barrow Street, River Styx, American Arts Quarterly, Light Magazine, Think Journal, Per Contra, La Petite Zine, San Pedro River Review, and elsewhere. Please welcome Alex Pepple.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy, for that rousing introduction. It's so good to see all of you here for another wonderful afternoon of Able Muse reading. And hey, that's Nicole. She never shows up for this event. Hi, Nicole. Anyhow, as I was saying, we're gonna have 3 wonderful poets reading for us this afternoon. We have Stephen, who is also editor for Able Muse, the magazine. So we're glad that he has a book with us now. So he can proudly call himself an Able Muse press poet. And of course, we have David Alpaugh, who's actually, this is his 2nd book with Able Muse. And I guess I should show you guys the books we have. I was mentioning Stephen. This is Stephen's book. And this is his latest with Able Muse, or his only one with Able Muse, World Too Loud to Hear, right? And this is actually going to be, it's now in pre-release and it's almost coming out in a month or so. And we'll have Barbara Lydecker Crane, and this is her book. This is actually an ekphrastic collection because it has images and musing on those images, as you can see, all the pages. So this is Barbara's book, and it's called "You Will Remember Me," and also coming out in a few months, actually in a month or so. And finally, we have David Alpaugh's book, which is Seeing the There. David tends to like the philosophical or scientific type of titles, as you can see. And so this is his 2nd book with us, as I've mentioned. And this is actually also, this is a book of visual poems. As I mentioned, Barbara's was a ekphrastic, which means she was musing on existing images. David created his own images, essentially. So as you can see, each page has images, and David actually is the one that put these images together for each pages. So as you can see, it's a very not only is he a talented poet, he's also a talented visual artist. So I hope we'll have a lot of fun today with these 3 wonderful poets. And meanwhile, I also urge everyone to support these poets by ordering their books from Able Muse. And while I am at it, I'll also remind everyone that Able Muse, the journal, is coming out soon, in a couple of months or so, and we've been working hard at it. Stephen, myself, and our fiction editor and the other editors. And so I'll urge you all to subscribe to Able Muse. And while subscribing to the print edition, you not only have access to the print edition, but also to all the digital editions that have ever been released online. So that's the bonus for subscription. Anyhow, like I mentioned, so good to see all of you today. And without further ado, I'll pass it on to our excellent host for this event this afternoon, Wendy. Take it away.
Thanks, Alex. I wanted to also acknowledge Karina Fernandez, who is the assistant editor at Able Muse and is taking care of all of our technical details today. Thank you for being here with us and taking care of us. You know, a few months ago, I was sort of lassoed into becoming this poet laureate of the Western Slope of Colorado. And one of the things that I've been doing is having invocations recited at all kinds of public events here in Colorado, school board meetings, town hall meetings, art openings, Audubon, meetings and things like that. So I'm going to start off with a very short poem, and I'm delighted to see that Susan McLean is here because it's a poem by Susan that is going to start us off today for our invocation. And it actually is the very first poem in Think Journal, in the current Think Journal. And it's called Artisanal. Sample our poems made by hand in tiny batches, not devised by algorithms on demand, skimmed and bland, homogenized. We use live cultures, tangy, aged, that taste of when and where it grew, produced by free-range minds, not caged. They're redolent and veined with blue. It's costly fare, our best years spent, distilled to flavors for your tongue, evoking with their nuanced scent something you yearned for once when young. So I really highly recommend this practice of, moving around in your communities and saying, hey, if you want a land acknowledgement or an invocation. So what I'm doing is just sort of directing the program and having regional poets go out to all kinds of events. And folks have been really open to this idea. So I'm just throwing it out there. All right. So first up tonight, or this afternoon, we have Stephen Kampa. He is the author of 4 books of poetry: Cracks in the Invisible, Bachelor Pad, Articulate as Rain, World Too Loud to Hear. That's the one we're probably going to hear most about tonight or today. He teaches and is the poetry editor of Able Muse. His latest book confronts today's zeitgeist of dark social norms, online and off. I just share with you a short little blurb. My apologies. Papers are sticking together. Well, they stuck together so much I can't find them. At any rate, I'm just going to tell you that there's a whole bunch of great blurbs about this book. So I'm really excited about it. All right, go ahead and take it away, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Wendy, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. Can everyone hear me all right? If at any point it becomes difficult to hear because of the neighbors' dogs who apparently want to participate this afternoon, just maybe do some kind of pantomime, maybe a dog-shaped, hand gesture would be good. So I'd like to start with a poem called The Night I Finished Auden. I wish I could say Auden is the presiding spirit of this book, but that seems to me like a pretty pretty big statement. So all I can say is I wish he were the presiding spirit of this book. He's a hero for me and someone who navigated, I think, public poetry in a way that I can only aspire to. The night I finished Auden. The night I finished Auden was much like any night. A palatable meal had appeased my appetite. A sweating green glass bottle provided company for Auden in absentia and absent-minded me. I like the later poems, mannered and talkative with doctrinaire digressions, proposing how to live gracefully with the knowledge that even the most wry, intelligent, and gentle among us, too, must die. Whiston, you mastered meters for which I know no names, and thanked the God who gave us our grammar and our games, then selflessly accomplished, a born iconoclast, your corpse, but left your corpus, of which I've read the last. I feel like one who's wandered through hitherto unseen landscapes, equipped with nothing but compass and canteen, and tasked by ghosts with finding a form that could contain an elegy for oceans, an epitaph for rain. When I was a younger aspiring writer, I read in Paul Fussell's wonderful book on poetic form and poetic meter that Auden was always hoping that he would attract readers on the lookout for exotic prosodic examples, and specifically mentioned Asclepiads. And it feels nice then to turn to a poem that is the best I can do for accentual syllabic versions of Asclepiads in English. It's going to sound a little herky-jerky. I'm not going to lie to you about this, but it seems to me pretty appropriate given where we're going. The poem is called Long After Horace, and it has a translated line, one rendered by Rosanna Warren. It says, "What God can the people call as the empire totters? Heaven knows, as the weeks accrete cancer-like the irate cells of their days, we spend half our time on the internet, skimming lists of the first symptoms of maladies, begging Google to find us feeds blessed with accurate facts, snorting at random memes, same as always. We have a clear motto, best of all fates, not to be bored. We aren't. Still, and oftener than we'd like, night arrives and our nerves jerk us awake. We scroll, calibrating our fears. We call information a flood, frame as a whirlwind, news, cycling past in its fast-paced clips, pluck some comfort from terms tying us back to earth. There where dangers are agentless, not like those we're afraid nobody made but us. Yes, we've scuttled the quaint accounts, unbelievable now, thinking the world could end racked by earthquakes, tornadoes, droughts, all the ancient machines. Innocence had its charms. Nowadays, we imagine cracked despots punching in codes, flanked by their renegade science goons who've designed a germ, gene, or cyborg with dream circuits to sort us out. Worse yet, knowing the odds, we're still synthesizing the best hormones to boost troops' bone strength, still titrating acids most useful for the prolonged eating away of hope. Perfect tools for the torture squads knocking briskly on doors. Once we'd have prayed to gods, bid them open the cloud-locked skies. Now we're writing concerned letters to men with ties. This morning, I think a lot of folks woke up to the news, if they hadn't already encountered it, that there is an active war now over Gaza. And I have a poem in here that I think is It's about the way that kind of assumes a background noise quality, a sort of inescapable and omnipresent quality. It's rather short. The poem is called Talking Heads. Behind the chatter of full blast shower water, I hear the swift tick of one steady drip ricochet off the faucet with an implicit impatience, one quick with something more sinister. Who has never heard at a drunk mixer a room-vaulting snicker crack the background gabble, nor sensed in current events some fait accompli, some calculated score, one strategic leak in what would be the last week before the war? Maybe just to say a word about this book, if it doesn't slow the momentum of our afternoon up too much. I teach my students all the time to think about poetry in terms of inward-facing poems and outward-facing poems. And obviously, this is an artificial distinction. Be difficult to write an inward-facing poem in absolute isolation. It'd be difficult to write an outward-facing poem that does not arise out of our own circumstances, hopes, experiences. But for this book, I wanted a batch of poems that felt more outward-facing. I wanted poems that might tell somebody in the future what it was like to be alive right now, at least to me. And as a result, a lot of it is a little cacophonous. It feels overwhelming sometimes to be experienced in this precise moment. And a lot of it has to do with our real-time dramatization of our own events. That's, I think, what that Talking Heads poem is about in a way. But this one, I think, does it more clearly. This poem is called Why We Remember the Martyrs. Forgive them, Father, St. Stephen mutters, for they know not what I'm about to do. And then he clamps his teeth down around the pin, pulls it, and lobs the grenade, like a stone, at the gathered mob of persecutors. This side is done, St. Lawrence, being grilled, growls. And when they flip him, there in his outstretched hands is a pair of well-oiled Glocks, and he fires with the cool precision of an expert marksman into the foreheads of the firebrands whose ire he'd so inflamed they'd held him over a real grill. And how could we forget that nameless Roman human torch, tarred by Nero and set alight to smoke out the remnant, who instead of suffering in silence or singing hymns to the God he felt sure he was soon to meet, wandered into the Roman powerworks facility and with his burning but not yet consumed body, in the most self-sacrificial of righteous gestures, ignited neighboring barrels of fuel, causing an explosion that decimated dozens of the surrounding Roman blocks and their inhabitants and stopped power for weeks, allowing the remaining Christian martyrs to rally, regroup, relock, reload, and return with full firepower the pagan fury of the Roman emperor on both him and his people, mowing them down for the pleasure of God. Sebastian with his Navy SEAL training and crossbow, picking them off one by one. Agatha lifting the rubber polymer faux boob to reveal the bomb below. And of course, Martin Luther King Jr., taking one last drag from his unfiltered cigarette and then extinguishing it in audible hissing fizzles against the stonework of the tower where he squats with his sniper rifle, the scope now pressed to his eye, delivering his famous one-liner, quoted forever after, though always wrongly and out of context, in a whiskey-soaked voice of hard-won knowledge, I had a dream. We celebrate them all, God's little flowers, jeweled sundews in that garden where traitors hang from branches and know where they belong, on cheap keychains, on T-shirts where their carefully airbrushed faces, bellicose though embellished, blaze unfaded no matter how often we wear them, on belt buckles, on a pricey pigeon gray limited run pair of cleats, on bedroom posters sporting a motto that captures the casus belli in words wound from twisted barbed wire, and to help them sleep soundly, wrapped in the myth, on the patterned pillowcases, sheets, and synthetic comforters we cover our children with. I just think heroism has changed a lot, hasn't it? You know, don't see a lot of saints action films, as far as I know. One of the preoccupations of this book is gun violence, and that poem addresses it, maybe indirectly. And I'd like to read a poem that was one of the earliest from the compositional process for this book. I live in Florida. I am not overly far from Parkland. And so this poem is not a response to the event so much. I find myself unable to formulate words for that. It's more about our response to the response, our collective inability to say much in those difficult moments. The poem is a villanelle, which I hope gestures towards the cyclical quality of this post-disaster discourse. And the poem is simply called The Offering. The room is full of empty chairs. The gods above break down, distraught. We offer them our thoughts and prayers. Later that week, the law declares in bullet points, we've learned a lot. The room is full of empty chairs, persuaded by these solemn airs. And those survivors, they are not. We offer them our thoughts and prayers, while an explosive skeptic shares links proving this, a deep state plot. The room is full of empty chairs. We've still got time if someone cares to leave us with a final thought. We offer them our thoughts and prayers, some suit recites as he prepares to squeeze off one last parting shot. The room is full of empty chairs. We offer them our thoughts and prayers. I recognize that a lot of that maybe has felt a little grim. So I'd like to do a poem maybe to end. Am I good on time, Wendy? Is it okay for me to read one more poem to sort of...
Yeah, you're good, Stephen. Go ahead.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'd like to read one that maybe ends in a better place. This poem is called Healing Leaves and Unimaginable Flowers. The first part of that comes from the book of Revelation. What other indignities must I suffer flagrantly before I find the just city, the garden I left before I was ever born? Pull up the policies, quote the terms of agreement, provide me with tables of the precise point value breakdown before I break down or out or up or through to the other side of grievance, because it's not so much the indignities themselves as the uncertainties regarding their relative scoring. When I mispronounce peony to rhyme with pony, stressing the long O, like crony, phony, stony, how many points do I earn? When I ask the woman in the none too slimming black dress when she's going to have her baby, and she tells me 4 months ago, how much is that worth? How much closer am I to the long promised prospect of healing leaves and unimaginable flowers? I picture heaven as a customer service desk where polo-shirted personnel with name badges, brocaded with the swoops and lags of a strange language, laugh and chat without ever answering the bright red phones that ring without ceasing. And I can take to them all the unfulfilling moments of my unfulfilling life, like some defective pair of clunky VR goggles, waiting a white plastic bag twist-knotted at the top for a refund or exchange. They don't ask for a receipt. They only want to know if I am ready, and when I tell them I've been ready my whole life, the phones stop ringing, the chatter snaps off. They stare at me with something between sadness and bewildered ardor and wish me a good day and send me back into the world, which is just what it has always been. One big, beautiful garden. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Stephen. For those outward-facing poems. What a beautiful distinction. And I did actually locate one of those blurbs I wanted to share with everybody. It's from Marianne Corbett, who is also a friend of Able Muse and who writes beautiful reviews. She says, Stephen Kampa's World Too Loud to Hear takes on the noise of the 21st century with a furious love and attention. The poems in this book lay out our terrible addictions to gun violence, to scientism, to screens, to empty celebrity, to social division, and to anger itself. But they also show us what remains worth saving: children, magic, and mystery. Amen. These poems delight equally in novel syllabic stanzas, calm iambics, and drumming accentuals, and they ratchet up poetic form to the tension of a crossbow with the same deadly aim. One of the wonderful things that, one of the wonderful perks of hosting is that I get copies of all the books. And this is a beautiful and sobering book, Stephen. So thank you for that lovely reading.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So we'll move on to Barbara Lydecker Crane. It occurs to me that all three of these books really do have themes running through them, and they really cohere beautifully. Barbara has been a finalist for 2 Rattle Poetry Prizes. She's won 2 Pushcart nominations, 3 Laureate's Choice Awards from the Maria Faust Sonnet Contest, and first prize in the Helen Scheibel Sonnet Contest. And I'm not sure exactly who wrote this. This is inside of the book. It might have been Alex who wrote this. In You Will Remember Me, Barbara Lydecker Crane's masterful sonnets illuminate the work and lives of artists from medieval through contemporary times. So what we have are, it's a collection of ekphrasis poems. They're absolutely exquisite. And I'm so excited to hear them come right out of Barbara's mouth herself. Welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy. That's really nice. You know, it occurred to me, that's outside. Sorry, I thought I was buzzing. It occurred to me that to come right after Stephen is interesting because Stephen, you're presenting poems that you hope the world will remember our century, our times when they read them. And my poems are all about centuries past and trying to show, I hope, in some small, vivid way, what it was like for any particular artist to be alive and working at that time. It was a real education to do all the research and write them all. Anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm really happy to be here. I really appreciate your tuning in. And thank you to Alex and to Wendy and to Karina. Thank you for, Karina's going to do the magic of showing the artworks that go with particular poems as I read them. So I can just quietly read my poems and not worry while the artwork comes on screen, which is nice. Okay, also, as Alex has said, these poems, and Wendy, these poems are all ekphrastic, so they all derive from particular paintings, really all portrait paintings, because I wanted to talk about people in this book, the people of the artists and the people of the paintings. And they're all persona poems, so you're not going to hear any I that refers to me. Every I that you hear is a particular painter, and I'll, of course, identify which painter that is in the beginning, so you'll know. So that's all you're going to hear from me. And Karina, if you would show slide number 1, we'll start with the art. Bingo. Okay. So you probably recognize this chap. This is Henry VIII, painted by Hans Holbein the Younger back in 1540. at Hampton Court, England. Holbein was German, but he worked there at Henry's court. And I'm imagining Henry might tell you this. I'm sorry, that Hans Holbein might tell you this. To feed my family, I paint his girth again. Such privilege at court I can't evade. King Henry's doublet could enfold 3 men inside its mink and glinting gold brocade. I draped a band of jewels around his chest. Together with the slope of his plumed hat, it makes a hint of halo. My private jest and public jibe at this colossal rat. Although I've made his royal raiment glow, I've not adorned the plunder of his face, his tiny mouth, his cheeks like risen dough, his weasel eyes. And though I know my place and bow to most caprices and commands, I won't enlarge his most unmanly hands. And the next one, Karina, if you've got it, number 2, is called Self-Portrait at the Clavichord. And that's it. Okay, this one is from Italy from 1577. It's a painting by Lavinia Fontana called Self-Portrait at the Clavichord with a servant. And I'll tell you the story about it in a minute, but first I'll just tell you 2 foreign words that appear in the poem. Virginum is Latin for virgin, and averato is Italian for emasculated. Arrangements. Bemoaning me unwed at 25, my needy father thought my art a draw, a sort of future dowry. He contrived how I'd impress my future father-in-law. I'd paint myself arrayed in lace and satin at the clavichord, a skill I cannot claim. I spoke my virtue and smattering of Latin with virginum inscribed beside my name. My portrait impressed. The fathers did decide I'd wed a man I'd never met. Soon, Gian began assisting me at work. His pride survived the gossip, as did his jaunty grin. Averato, he knew the neighbors said. 11 babies, put that barb to bed. It's all true, true story. Okay, next one is No Angels, number 3. Okay, now if you can see this, it's a little dark, but you see the woman lying there and all the men around her. And so here's the story. This is a painting by Caravaggio, painted it in Rome around 1605. It's called Death of the Virgin. As I'm sure you know, all paintings at that time, if not all, were painted for the church, as this was. So some Catholic prelate, is that the word? Would have been Caravaggio's patron for this painting. So the painting is Death of the Virgin. My poem is called No Angels. The Virgin Mary here is lying dead. Her body's not ascending out of sleep. No angels herald her from overhead. No holy symbols, save for one I keep, her halo, that faint sliver. She wears a plain red dress, her hair's askew, her feet are bare. My patron sputters that this is profane, beyond the bounds of what is doctrinaire. My subject's all too real, because I give her the face and body of a prostitute I knew who perished in the Tiber River. Now she and I are both in disrepute. My patron knew the woman too. Ironic, I've made the whore a virgin and iconic. Okay, number 4 is Girl with a Turban. Thank you, Karina. That's the one. I know you all know this one. Girl with a Pearl Earring by Vermeer in the Netherlands, painted 1665. I'll tell you that no one really knows who his model is, but there's some supposition to back up what I'm about to suggest. My poem is called Girl with a Turban. I had this daughter pose. She was 11 or 12 and pleased to skirt her chores that day as second mother to our other 7. Paintings of exotic women pay, and every grocer knows I'm short of cash. And so I dressed Maria in a gold coat and wrapped 2 lengths of silken sash around her head in turban style. Each fold gleamed when I turned her head to catch the light. To innocence, I added some allure. I had her lick and part her lips, not quite prepared to speak. Enticing, yet demure. Watching me with liquid eyes, she shows a wary longing for all she almost knows. The next one is the number 5, The Empty Lap of Luxury. There we go. I'll tell you a little about this, but I'll first mention, notice her empty lap. It was never painted. It was never finished. Mystery. Well, I did a lot of sleuthing, and my theory is possibly correct, but anyway, it makes me laugh. The painting is called Mr. and Mrs. Andrews. It's a very large painting painted in England around 1750 by Thomas Gainsborough. So the backstory is true. The second half of what you're going to hear is my supposition. The Empty Lap of Luxury. It started well enough. My father owed a debt to hers, and so I said I'd paint this pair. They posed on land that was bestowed on them, 3,000 fertile acres. A faint disdain dimmed her eyes and chilled her smile at landless me. She shimmered in her gown beside her rumpled hunter husband, while I painted this unspoken dressing down. The gunpowder pouch that dangled off her chap became a limp but sporting specimen. To fill in Mrs. Andrews' empty lap, they asked for flowers. I would not give in. A fresh-killed pheasant, I insisted. Deadlock. A shame she wouldn't hold a lifeless cock. There, I said it. Okay, next one is Arrangement with Mother, number 6. I bet there are not too many poems that end with that line, right? Okay, shape up. This is, as you know, you obviously know what this painting is, but Whistler didn't call it Whistler's Mother. He called it Arrangement in Gray and Black, number 1. He painted it in London where he worked, although he was American by birth. And it was painted in 1871. I call the poem Arrangement with Mother. I've placed my mother sideways in a space composed of neutral shapes in 2 dimensions. She's plainly angled in widow's black. Her face is stern and slightly tilted down. Inventions at my easel elevate my life. The critics are approving of my art. I cringe when mother chides, find a wife, or worse, come home and make another start. My mother cannot tell me what to do. Her helping, though, lets me keep working on. What sets her firmly on her judgment seat? The pedestal I placed beneath her feet. My mother might appear a paragon or just another polygon to view. All right, couple more. Number 7, Karina, House of Cards. There it is. Oh, this one's kind of sad. Okay. The poem is called Brood, B-R-O-O-D. The painting is called House of Cards. It's painted by a Ukrainian woman, Zinaida Serebriakova, in 1919. No chatter from these 4, nor a smile. My children build a house of cards to while away an afternoon. Their listless eyes reflect cascading loss and compromise. Their papa died, imprisoned without cause by Bolsheviks who scoffed at Russian laws. They looted and burned our beloved country home. I paint my children in a monochrome. I found an unused tube of Prussian blue. We face the choice of decent, healthy food or oil paints. I'll start next week to sketch with cheaper charcoal on paper. I will fetch what cash I can and work with speed and prayer. This painting holds my love and my despair. There's a horrible end to that. She left Russia just before the borders closed, and when she tried to come back, she ended up losing track of a couple of her children for like a decade. Anyway, I have a couple more, just two more. The next one is number 8, My Other Life. This one, yes. This is a painting called I and My Model. It was painted around 1930 by a German woman named Lydecker, and I call the poem My Other Life. In the 20s, before the brown shirts rise, a woman like me could live almost as free as a man. We seldom saw chastising eyes when walking arm in arm, my model and me. Rose was slim and striking, and she was bolder, tougher. Here she stands in just a slip and rests a hand lightly on my shoulder. Then came the tightened screws of Nazi grip, and Jewish artists weren't allowed to show their work or even buy supplies. Escaping to Sweden, I wept that Rose refused to go. I'm drawing children's portraits now and scraping by. This work I keep recalls the time, how could I know it then? That was my prime. My last poem, number 9, is called To My Art Students. That one, yeah. Tell you a tiny bit about the, well, the painting is called Patience Serious. I assume Patience is the girl's name. Painted in 1915 by Robert Henry in New York. Robert Henry was a really interesting and well-known, well-regarded teacher to art students. And he wrote a book called The Art Spirit, which some of you may have heard of because it's been in print ever since 1915. It's a great book for artists, and I think it also has some good words to say to poets, which is why I included this poem that I call To My Art Students. My father killed a man. Our Midwest town was named for Pa. There, I'd never shake ignominy. I changed my name and found my way to Paris to study art and make myself a different life. You all must dare to break away like that. Ignore the sneers of Design Academy muckamucks. Share your paintings with a few like-minded peers with eyes as sharp as this young Muppet's gaze of big brown eyes. Don't try to win acclaim. Use painting to enlighten and amaze. The means of making a life is not the same as the means of living a life. If it is art that spurs you on, you'll live a life with heart. And that is it. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Barbara. What a beautiful reading, and a really good representation of, what's in the book. The book is actually in chronological order, and really does feel like you're getting a little bit of an art history lesson through the eyes of a poet, and through the eyes of, and through the heart of the imagination. It's a really moving experience. Thank you for that, Barbara.
Thank you
I
so
should
much,
say,
Wendy. Thank you.
I should say too, that our next poet also has a whole bunch of images. And if you if you set your view to gallery view, then you'll actually get the images and you'll have the poet on the side of your screen too. So that worked really well, Barbara, because we got to see you while you were reading too. Yeah, there, you said it. That's great. That was a highlight for me, and I was really glad that you chose that one because that was one of my favorites from the book. Okay, so next we have David Alpaugh.
Just to add, Wendy, before you go along, I should say, instead of gallery view, you should use speaker view because you'll still see the image and just the reader on the side. So use
You're right.
speaker view.
Yeah, thank you for correcting me on that, Alex. That's what I meant.
All right, good.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so next we have David Alpaugh, who still thinks of himself as a Jersey boy, but has lived long enough in the San Francisco Bay Area to be included in the heyday press anthology California Poetry from the Gold Rush to the present, and to have been a finalist for Poet Laureate of California. He's published more than 400 poems, holy moly, in literary journals, from Able Muse to Poetry to Ziziva, and his essays on PoBiz in Poets and Writers, Rattle, Mudlark, and the Chronicle of Higher Ed have been widely discussed. His first collection was called Counterpoint and won the Nicholas Rorsch Poetry Award from Storyline and was reissued in 2021 by Red Hen Press. Wow, that's impressive. Without further ado, David Alpaugh.
Thank you,
All right,
Wendy.
David, there you go. You're good.
Thank you, Wendy, for that introduction. I'm going to share my official poems now. And just want to make sure that they come up for everybody. Everybody have them? Okay, here's the wonderful cover that Alex designed for book with a kind of contemporary earth goddess rising out of the mountains and holding a light, which she's holding up to the title and to what's beyond in the sky. Want to thank Alex for the title, and also since this book has many color images that present a lot of problems, and also multiple fonts for all of the beyond work that he did on this book to make it as perfect as possible. It's the first opening poem in the book. Once upon a time, like the soul, is difficult to locate. No wonder if you've forgotten, killing 7 flies with one blow, being brought back to life by a kiss, stealing rampion from a witch's garden. Enough if you remember simply this: long ago, an onlyest bottle opened, a beneficent genie did appear, and you were granted more than 3 paltry wishes. Before he springs, the leopard lies in the grass, watching, listening, judging distances, making the leap in his mind. You always find him looking ahead. You never find him looking behind. Einstein's mind began whirling like a dervish. He cried, "Eureka! Everything's curvish." Wanted, dead or alive. Should you come across Schrodinger's cat, let me know if it's living or dead. Don't waste time looking underneath rocks. Don't waste time looking under your bed. That cat's in a sealed box. The box is in Schrodinger's head. His cat is both dead and alive, but Schrodinger is simply dead. On the kinder, gentler image for COVID-19 at www.cdc.gov. Why should a killer so callous, so vicious, look so darn cuddly, so unsuspicious? Such beguiling duplicity slyly deletes beauteous truth from that ode by John Keats. A rotter so dangerous, so ruthless, uncanny, should strike us as jagged or squishy or oily, not like a birthday gift from your granny, a throw pillow, say, or a doily. I'm skipping over some of these longer poems, but tantalizing you a little, hopefully, with them. Here's one of the shortest in the book. I saw two snowflakes exactly alike, but they melted before I could post them on Instagram. Trying to live in the moment? No one's ever that fast. Those bright stars you see may no longer be. All we can see is our past. Pivotal question. Why must they turn and look back, ruin everything at the last moment? Lot's wife, Eurydice's lover, their answers only partly satisfied. Had to make certain she still followed. Couldn't believe the city I loved was in flames. Why, steps away from sure ground, this urge to look over our shoulder, to risk untold joy just up ahead for a furtive glance behind. This poem was used by Richard Peabody for his Gargoyle Journal as the frontispiece for the 2021 issue. Disunited we stand, but on one thing we agree. We must prefer fiction to reality. After 7 years of drought, sad not to feel glad when the rain comes, because I have a leak in my roof. As you stand on a high place, suddenly that urge, your knees weaken, you feel the impulse grow. Will you take a small step back into all the things you are? It is not the business of this poem to know. A tale of two colors, black versus green. One driver gets to drive all the way home, have pizza with his family, go to bed. The other is pulled over, sits in a cell, lies in a hospital ward, or is dead. Each car has a broken taillight. All taillights are red. But something has made all the difference, or so somebody said. Burning bright. Deer wonder why we had to shock. Doves wonder why we had to awe. Field mice, why we ran amok. The tiger must exercise its jaw. This is the shortest poem in the book. Mayfly, here today, gone today, no tomorrow. Selfie. Narcissus was the entrepreneur who tried to take one first. but snapshots being in their infancy, his watery camera did him in. Still, the rippling image that thrilled Narcissus was our species' first attempt at a selfie. Thus began our war on ephemerality that continues to this day. What Shakespeare fought with his sonnets, millions via photos they display. Horton's Who said it for us all, soft but clear. We are here, we are here, we are here. The crinklers of the opera, M&Ms, peanuts, Ritz crackers, dulcet instruments purchased in the lobby are unwrapped in the dark for your delight, enhancing the beauty of Cosi fan tutti, or whatever be the music of the night. Eating chicken for the first time. You're gonna love it. Go on, take a bite. You're so right. Tastes like rattlesnake. The young are begging theory to spare them from experience, politics from history, poetics from the line. Some sprint, some hobble to the table, all in time. Break bread here, gulp the dead black wine. Eden, a nice place to visit, to drop in for a bite to eat. But sweet, aren't you glad we don't have to live here? Rather there. Seeing Orange after Henri Bergson. In an alternate world without a smidge of red or yellow, a world without a single daffodil, where the wine we swill is always white, we'd all see orange as pure orange, red and yellow nowhere in sight. It's a poem about what is called the giant impact hypothesis and the supposed creation of the moon. The big splash. 4.5 billion years ago, Theia splashed into our world, breaking off a massive chunk of Earth she rudely hurled thousands of miles into space, where gravitation, night and moon, built what Anglo-Saxon druids first called Mona, then the moon. Poets, singers use it still to satisfy June's rhyming slot. The moon comes out each night and rules the tides as a forget-me-not. At times we tread the earth and feel that all is well within her clay, but every church bell seems to peal. Something has been torn away. True story. The reality of fiction is all in your mind. And if Robert Bly was reading a short poem, he'd read it twice. So what the heck? True story. The reality of fiction is all in your mind. Life. Say there's oodles of it scattered through EE's million, billion, trillion stars. Myriads grasping the theory of everything that so eluded Einstein and Hawkins. Wouldn't such a population explosion cheapen life on Earth? And if we are alone, if Jung's right that we are here to give the world objective existence, as our sun darkens, last eye closes, last word uttered, last kiss, kiss, with no one left to perceive the being of any one or thing, will no thing finally exists? When I try to imagine nothing, something always gets in the way. Dawkins' nightmare, Richard Dawkins, renowned biological evolutionist and passionate atheist, imagining him with a concern that's bothering him. Dawkins' nightmare. Why do I have bad dreams? Wake and shake with fright. Because I know those who suffer from the God delusion are headed for endless night, that they'll never get to know they were wrong, and I'll never get to prove I was right. I'm going to close with this poem, which is the last poem in the book. It's a goodbye poem and kind of metaphorical for ending a book where hopefully there have been readers reading it, and the readers are now going to put the book down and go back to reality and to themselves. Loneliness rising. The prepartum blues subdue us as we loll around the table, cups drained, plates empty, conversation stall. There's plenty of coffee in the pot. How about another piece of strudel? Too bad Bonnie couldn't be here. The hush we end up in is holy. No one wants to profane it. Each is reluctant to utter words that will nudge us into the night, until, with a squeak that startles, a chair is pushed back from the table. Loneliness rising, time to head home to ourselves once again.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. You know, one of the things I love about this collection of yours, David, is that it's utterly disarming. You almost feel like a kid as you turn the page and you're sort of taken by the images, and then you don't know if you're going to get sort of punched in the gut, or you're going to get, you know, a real sense of poignancy or a giggle. And it occurs to me, I taught in a high school last week, and it had been a while, and I was presenting, and then at one point I held up a book that had pictures, and suddenly I felt like I had everybody's attention. And it really occurred to me that not just kids nowadays, but even we adults, when we have an image to look at, then we're suddenly all in. It's unfortunately or fortunately the times in which we live. I'm just really taken by the way that all three of you just went all in with the idea of what you were doing, particularly as somebody who has a really short attention span. And I tend to go, you know, I'm all into this, I'm all into that. And then if I try to pull everything into one sort of big bowl, I just get really, I don't know how to deal with it. So I'm hoping that we have some questions from the audience. I know I have questions, but if you have a question, you can raise your hand, or maybe just unmute yourself.
Well, this is not really a question, Wendy, but I would like us all to give a big round of applause to everyone who read, you know, because they just did a wonderful job for the afternoon. So everyone can unmute, and let's give them a round of applause.
Terrific. Absolutely terrific. Really, really terrific. Very nice.
It really was.
Very
It really
nice.
was. I have a question for the visuals for both Barbara and David. Did you have to worry about copyright at all? I don't just imagine that Barbara did, but how did you sort of do this collaboration?
I mostly was using a site called Unsplash, and there are literally millions of photographs and images on the site from photographers, and they they claim no copyright, and you were allowed to use them for anything, even for commercial purposes, which is extremely unusual. And I'd say probably 85% of the images are from Unsplash. It has been taken over by Getty Images since I was using it, but they are still maintaining the free images and using it as a site for their images. So the first thing you're going to see is Getty Images that you have to pay for, and then many more images, millions literally come up after that. And then there were other instances where I needed to get permission. Most notable was I have a poem on Philip Larkin, which I didn't include in the reading, and I really wanted to use this image, and it was the Portrait Museum in London, and I had to pay $150 for it. But,
Oh, wow.
so what? And then there are a lot of other images, like the George Frederick Watts image that I use on the on one of the poems is copyright is run out, and it's on Wicca. There's something called Wicca Media Commons, where you can get it and have no worry about copyright.
Thank you for that, David. Barbara?
It's a process. The short answer is don't try this at home. Get yourself a big publisher where there's somebody in the publishing house who's paid to get permissions, because the short of the deal is that if an artist has been dead for 70 years or more, you can use an image of their work. But that's a long time to wait. That's why there are not as many of the newer artists who have their work represented. I managed to get some of the newer permissions. Like one artist just never got back to me, and I was contacting his gallery repeatedly and telling him exactly what the project was and all the rest. And then some artists would say, yes, you can use it, but you have to send me a copy of the whole book and then a couple of the finished copies. And so I said yes. And then the nicest answer came from Fernando Botero. You might know that he died about a month ago. He was very old and lived in South America. I tracked down his email and I wrote to him, and within a day or two he wrote back and he said, of course you may use my painting in your book. Great. Anyway, it's really a hard process to go through to get all their permissions, unless the artists are dead and gone and you can find their image free and clear on Wikimedia Commons.
I've done a few YouTubes where I've used mainly contemporary images, and I've always contacted the artists. And I remember there was one artist, very famous Israeli artist, and I was able to get his email, and I sent him an email and asked if I could use him, explain what the project was. And he wrote back to me and said, yes, of course you may use it. The wonder is that you even asked.
That's
Right.
great. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
But I've
Yeah,
given all the Unsplash artists credit at the back of my book, so everybody is acknowledged.
Yeah, I did an anthology a couple of months ago, and I won't mention any names, but there were a couple of kind of famous poets, and I reached out to the estates, to these poets that they'd only been dead maybe 20 or 30 years. And the amount of money that they were asking was just ridiculous. I know. And I also, I mean, it was really hard for me not to, shoot back. If so-and-so were alive, they would say yes, because they want the work circulating. This is cost prohibitive and really disturbing that you don't have the same sort of approach to this as the person that, the poet themselves would have had, which is, yeah, give me credit, give me an honorarium, but this isn't not going to get rich off of this. So let's be real here. It was frustrating. And there was one that I really chased after, and then I finally just went, no, I can't do it. Yeah. But it's true. Most people don't even ask anymore with the internet. People don't even think of who wrote what or who drew what or who painted what. It's just out there. Yeah. I wanted to ask Stephen about his sort of state of mind, because I know for myself, I have to take big breaks from, paying attention to what's happening in that outward facing experience, because I find that it's really hard on me emotionally, psychologically. Like, how did you, was it actually helpful for you to sort of process things by writing so directly about things, some of them more tragic?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I think if it was helpful, it maybe was helpful for me to be, I guess, reminded of my responsibility as a citizen. I was not interested in politics the majority of my life, and felt that by not paying attention to the public dimension of life, I had kind of abdicated some responsibility that was maybe important. And it's helped me in my teaching just to invite my students to sit up, look around a little bit. I don't know that it has helped me feel better about, I guess, a general sense of optimism. I think the general sense of optimism is something we just sort of wrestle with for ourselves, is it not? You have a decision, when you get up in the morning, whether today is a day that could surprise you with goodness or not. And I keep thinking defaulting to the idea that you might be surprised by goodness is probably a healthy choice. Yeah, but it actually was kind of a difficult thing to write. So, but you don't always get a choice in the matter, do you? You sort of write what you feel compelled to write. So I don't know if that was a useful answer or not. It's the best I got.
No, it's really, really helpful. I find when I'm overwhelmed and by something that is really bothering me from the news, that when I start to write about it, it actually kind of makes me feel worse. So I really admire those who can kind of survive, kind of looking it in the eye and just and also making beauty out of it, that these are beautifully shaped and beautifully formed pieces of art. Yeah, I think it was a very good answer.
Thank you.
Well, if no one has a question, I have a question to ask our three readers here. I'm just wondering, how long did it take you to put together this manuscript from beginning? And what did you find challenging, and what did you find easy and straightforward about doing it?
Well, I'll start. I started it, I don't know, I think I wrote the first few poems maybe about a year before COVID. And then when COVID started, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll lock all the doors and just keep writing these art sonnets. And I have a lot of art books because I have some background there. And of course, there's everything on the internet. And I just burrowed deep and long. And I loved the process of writing and learning. And sure, I didn't write about everybody that came across my way, but if there was something there that piqued my interest, I dug in like a happy little groundhog. And I really, really enjoyed the process. Sure, there were bumps along the way, but basically I really loved the process of learning and writing.
That's good.
I think the first thing that you need to do when you have a collection, you have a number of poems. Let's say you have 100 poems and you're going to bring it down to 65 or 70, is just that process of deciding which poems are essential and which poems belong together. And then the second thing that is always difficult is deciding how are you going to introduce yourself to the reader? Which poem is going to be the first poem in the book? And how is it going to be kind of not an umbrella, but how is it going to suggest what is going to be expanded on and illuminated as you proceed? And then the second hardest choice there is, how are you going to say goodbye at the end Because basically what I see the poet doing is you pick up the reader with that first poem. Hopefully you seize the reader's imagination and you carry him through a number of other poems. And then at the very end, you have to put him back down into reality. You have to bring him down. And how do you get out of the book? And so those are my main concerns. And then in seeing the there, I spent a lot of time pairing poems, so that if you actually had the book, you'd see that there's always a reason why a poem is on the left page and another one is on the right. They work together in different ways. So those are the main things.
I want to second the difficulty of finding a good order for the presentation of poems. I think that's challenging, and I found it so. And you had asked, Alex, how long it took, and I think the first poems that felt like they were calling attention to themselves as a new project were from 2017. So it was a little bit of time in the making to get that book finished.
That's good. Thank you all.
My question kind of piggybacks on that, because you're talking about the sequencing. When you have material, and this is a question for all of the poets, when you have material in the same book and some of the poems are funny or have funny elements, even though they're not light verse per se, and other poems don't have humorous elements, like how do you approach the structure of the book, the sequencing? Are you more apt to put the poems with some funny elements together? Are you more likely to use them for comic relief and kind of pepper them throughout? Or are you breaking it into sections? Like what were maybe some difficulties with that, or some things that you knew, aha, this is the solution?
Well, okay, it's just, first person is ready to speak, right? I'll go. There were some instances where I knew there was something a little funny in one of these poems, and I could just leave it in place because I knew I was going chronologically. So if somebody wanted to make a joke about Henry VIII or, Gainsborough about the dead bird business or whatever, there it was. Because it wasn't me trying to be funny. It was the painter. But I'm struggling with that right now with the new manuscript. I'd love to have a few places where people can laugh, but yet you can't just introduce a piece of cake in the middle of all the liver, or the onions. I don't know how to do it if it's in general. So I'm really curious to what y'all will say.
Just do it kind of by intuition, I think. But Robert Frost says that if a poem is written with outer seriousness, it must have inner humor. And if it's written with outer humor, it must have inner seriousness. And I think that's what I kind of aim for when I'm writing a comic poem. Sometimes I'm actually surprised when I do an in-person reading and I read a poem and people really laugh. I mean, laughter. And I don't think it's quite that hilarious, because I think there's kind of an inner seriousness to it. But there are moods that you don't want to break. If you have a very serious poem or philosophical poem that you don't want to break with a comic poem, or the other way around. But it's just kind of an intuitive call, I think.
I'm not funny, and it really simplifies this a great deal. I've read about being funny, and I've seen it on the internet. I actually, we just read in my class Cornelius Eady's book, Brutal Imagination, which is wonderful. The second section of it is poems spoken by a different set of personae than the rest of the book. And he says in an interview explicitly that the purpose of that section was to relieve some of the tension of the difficult human material of the first section in the book. If you don't know the book, it's really beautiful. It's astonishing. Beautiful is a difficult word in this context, but it's a book of poems spoken in the voice of the notional man that Susan Smith created as the carjacker who kidnapped her children. If you remember that story from the 90s, she had made up a kidnapper when she was the person who was responsible for her missing children. So he felt like putting them all in one section maybe was the best way to do it. Maybe he was thinking about what you were asking about, Nicole, right? That you don't want to, like, if you're going to have something that changes the tone a little bit, you don't want it to be so abrupt. I think for myself, it would just be a question of, let's say, like to borrow Barbara's metaphor, how much onion exactly are we trying to move away from? Because if it's too much, it's going to seem pretty jarring. And then there are other maybe things where it's lightly, oniony, and we can move more smoothly into that comic note there for a second. That would be that's the only thing I can think of, is you just don't want it to be too dramatic a shift. Yeah.
Jack
I was
Gilbert
thinking of
has
Kim
wonderful-
Bridgeford's book, A Crown for Ted and Sylvia. It has a lot of poems that aren't funny, and then there's a section of jiggery pokery poems that are funny. So that in that structure, like she's isolated those poems. But I was wondering, well, there might be a poet who decides to weave them in somehow, and for whatever the subject and the theme is, it works that way. I mean, Barbara, you're kind of like, whoa, I was let off the hook because it was all chronological. That had to be a big relief. Like, well, here's my sequence. There you go.
That's right. That's right. It was great. And it wasn't even me trying to be funny. It was the artist trying to be funny. Ha ha.
Jack Gilbert has a great short poem.
Theoretically.
Jack Gilbert has a great short poem that goes, Greek heroes don't play ball on the beach, and I don't write funny poems. He read that in Berkeley at a reading years ago, and everybody cracked up and laughed. It was hilarious.
Maybe it's temperamental too, because I confess the idea of sort of containing or even quarantining all of the funny stuff in one spot makes me feel like the writer's being apologetic about that. And that is not my experience of life. You don't get to contain awkward, funny moments in one room of your house or whatever. It permeates the whole of your life. So I think that, to some degree, maybe it's just temperamental. I would be more inclined to maybe space them out a little bit, just because that seems to be more how our natural experience of the world is that the funny and the sad are mixed together, sometimes in uncomfortable ways. And as long as we're not making jokes at a funeral, unless the person we're celebrating would have wanted that, right? I think it's okay to let them blend into each other, because that's how it works for me anyway.
I was just thinking before you said that you wouldn't tell jokes at a funeral, right? You wouldn't, would you? And then I thought, oh, no. You might say, oh, and remember the way his socks wouldn't match, and everybody would laugh.
Yeah.
Because that's okay. You're not telling a joke that has the joke relates in a kind way.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the challenge.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's such a great question, Nicole, because especially those of us who work with, meter, we tend to have some funny poems, and what to do with them in a collection is always a question. And there are those who say, do not put funny poems in your collection because it destroys the mood. And others who say, interspersing is the way to do it. Like Auden, he had a whole book of just his funny, poems, right? But then when you're putting together a collected, then they tend to put all the funny ones together if they're not going, chronologically. But I definitely am one of those people who appreciates somebody making a joke at a funeral, because to me, laughter and weeping are just so close together, and the best humor really brings those things together. So what I try to do in my books, and is sort of like, if I've got like a really funny poem, then maybe 2 or 3 poems before it, I start to kind of groom the reader to know that there's, you know, is it going to be a little, and so I start with just a little bit of humor, and then the next poem might be a little bit, you know, so that now it's not like all of a sudden I'm going from, you know, the death obsessed poet to, you know, slapstick, so that I can kind of work up to it. It's kind of the opposite of when they say you're going to give a speech. I always crack a joke because it opens everybody up. And I mean, that's what I do when I'm doing a reading. I almost always start with a funny poem because that's how you open up people's hearts. And then suddenly when you get that laughter, it changes the energy in the room. And then I can get, you know, deadly serious. Such a great question. I think we all don't know quite how to work with it. Also, I'll say, Stephen, you know, when you lean into the camera and say, "I'm not funny," that is inherently hilarious.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, it just so happens that this particular project was maybe less inclined towards being funny, but even in there are a couple. There was one I didn't read that I thought about reading for everybody, but it's got some foul language. Not just, you know, you want to be sensitive about people, especially room full of folks in this digital space. I wasn't sure, but there's some in there that maybe are a little more manageable.
All right, do we have any other questions?
This has been a great discussion. Really, I really like this part. I could go on and on normally, but at this point I'm ready to bolt.
Ready to go.
I'm gonna stay with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting how, you know, us bookish types, we really appreciate imagery too. You know, it really kind of allows, and also I'm very big on, you know, integrating the arts, which is really what we got here. Integration with, you know, world events, integration with history, integration with, you know, very contemporary looking imagery. It was really, this is what I've been really trying to do in recent years too, is not to put poetry off in its own sort of separate room.
Yeah.
Well, I think Alex, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Well, I guess since nobody has any more questions, I'll just thank everyone for coming out this afternoon, and thank our wonderful readers, Stephen, David, and Barbara, and of course you, Wendy. Great hosting job, and thanks to Karina for doing a lot of the technical stuff here.
Yes.
So I hope to have the video for recording in a couple of days or so. And as I mentioned, be sure to subscribe to Able Muse, and you also get access to all the digital copies. And be sure to support the readers by getting their books at ablemusepress.com. I had the links posted in the chat at the beginning, so they're all there. So thank you, everyone, and I hope to see you all next time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
Terrific. Terrific.